allegiance to the flag.
Chairman Subio is present, Ms. Jones is present, Mr. Trask, Ms. Mabry is absent tonight, and Mr. Higgins is here. Obviously, I am here, and Lieutenant O'Brien is here. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I've circulated the minutes from last month's meeting, and no one has any comments. We ask the chairman ask for a motion for approval.
Motion to approve.
I move that the minutes, the November 10th minutes be approved.
Second. Okay. You want to discuss the possibility?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yeah, that's okay. Right. So now,
All right, now we want to discuss the possibility of rule changes to the civil service rules.
Lieutenant's comments?
Yeah, so I just, would like to take a minute and just rehash what we already spoke about. Recently, probably not recently, but there's a large gap in the discipline that's available to the chief of police when it's appropriate to deal out to an officer. And basically it goes from a citation, which is a written reprimand, all the way down to a suspension without pay. Now, I can assure you the intention here is not to start giving out more discipline, just to keep the current rules of when it's appropriate. And throughout the course of a year, like any other organization, discipline is appropriate. But what the chief is really looking for is to have more options and more flexibility. And the suspension without pay is not only is that a harsh punishment for an officer, but the other attachment to that is you're not eligible for a promotion test if you're suspended without pay for 1 year after your suspension. So the chief was looking up some different options, and an informal list that I had thought about and obviously would bring before this board for some kind of approval would be, we would still have a citation. There would be a citation with a fine, and I'll come back to that. That's already on the books. A forfeiture for accrued time off. That does not include eliminating you from taking promotion tests with the year. So every year officers start with a bank of time. Up to 36 hours, the chief would be able to remove 2 or 3 days from your bank, no more than 36 hours. And again, that punishment or discipline would not include a prohibition on you taking the next promotion test. Then continue on with a suspension with pay, a suspension without pay, and obviously termination. So those are it would give the chief more flexibility. I used an example last month that we had an officer who was out there doing excellent work. He was being proactive. He saw a person stumbling in the road by the Wawa on Ridge Pike, imagine that. And as he was turning around to get that person out of the road, he was at fault and caused a motor vehicle accident. That's an example of where a citation may not be enough, but a suspension without pay seemed like it was too much. But they were really the only two options available. And that's when we first started really thinking about this, about having some other steps. More options are always good, right? More options are always good. And that's what the chief is asking for this board to consider in terms of a rule change. The other thing I would like to mention in conjunction with the rules changes, there is an allowance for a citation with a fine. Nobody wants to take money from officers, but again, there are times when it may be appropriate. The fine has been, it's already in the civil service regulations, but it's at $75, and that's probably a little bit outdated. So the chief was looking for between 75 and 500, and giving a little bit more of a range. I'm not judging anybody else's money. $75 is still a lot of money to me. I'm not downplaying that. but again, just to have a range depending on severity or what the chief feels. Sometimes there's property that's damaged by an officer as a result of him, not following the rules and regulations. And one way to help, in some ways, recruit some of that would be to have more of a flexibility with fine. So the fine from 75 to 500, and more steps in the available to the administration.
How long does a citation stay in their file?
It stays in their file for 2 years. It stays in their file for 2 years. Well, let me back. It stays in your file forever. It can only be part of the consideration for what the next discipline is for 2 years. So we'll always know what discipline any officers ever faced. We have a redundant system, but an accident is a good example where if you get into, the first time you get in an accident, for the most part, you'll get a citation. For the most part, I speak in general terms. But if you get in 3 in 6 months, you might not, and you're at fault on these, you're most likely moving on from a citation because of your track record. But after 2 years, any accidents prior to that cannot be part of the consideration for the discipline. So 2 years in terms of how the current situation is going to be looked at and viewed.
If we should change these, as you request, okay? When you make this up and present this to the officers, right, is it going to tell them what would cause them not to be able to take the sergeant test?
Well,
in other words, if you do this, then we're not going to allow you to take the sergeant test. However, we will relax this, and this.
We're not actually relaxing anything. We're adding more steps in between. So if you get suspended without pay, and it does happen, obviously, you would still be ineligible to take the next promotional exam. The forfeiture of accrued time off would be, so you have citation here, you have suspension without pay here. The chief is looking for the accrued time off without pay be removed from your bank in between those 2 steps. And it would be the chief's preference that not being able to take the next promotional exam would not be attached to the forfeiture of accrued time off. If the regulations already say suspended without pay, you're not eligible to take the next promotion exam for 12 months, that language wouldn't change. It would be adding additional language for some steps in between. And yeah, we would of course, we'd let the officers know there's been changes to it. But this is not a collective bargaining issue. This is a civil service issue.
Right.
So our contract is silent on discipline other than how you go about challenging discipline if you get it. In our collective bargaining agreement, as I read it, we don't consult with the officers about what the discipline is, but they have the right to know what the discipline is. What is in the collective bargaining unit is if you are disciplined and you don't agree with it, here's what you need to do to represent yourself.
No, I understand all that. I was just thinking about what you were presenting, and if the officers will know, hey, if you do this, then you can't take the sergeant test. If you're charged with any of these violations.
Yeah, no, it's not that cut and dry. What they know is if you are suspended without pay, you're not eligible to take the next test.
Okay.
But there's not like a one-size-fits-all, and in my opinion, there shouldn't be. So until until I make a recommendation, but until the chief has a specific fact pattern in front of him, he doesn't make a decision based off what all the side issues are. You know, like one of the considerations in the example I gave where the officer was at fault in the accident was he was out there doing good police work and really trying to serve the public, but by trying to serve the public in one way, he didn't serve the public in other motors in another way. So that's what brought this all to light was I don't really have the options I would like in front of me. I don't want this guy to be suspended without pay because he's a good officer. There are probably promotions coming up, or at least likely in the next year, and that was too far in the chief's mind. And the citation wasn't really far enough, but those were the options he had. And he's looking to to add some more steps.
So, is there, as far as citations go, is there a certain number of citations that also eliminate you from being eligible to
No.
take the test? Like, you could have 10.
You could
and
have
you
10.
still be eligible.
You could be, yes. But ma'am, I can tell you that if somebody has 10 citations in
I
a
just
short
made
period of
up a
time,
number.
yeah, if someone started doing that, again, without a specific fact pattern, I'm speculating, but before they got to 10, they probably wouldn't be getting citations anymore. The progressive discipline, just for having various infractions. If you started getting like 3 or 4 infractions in a year, that required formal discipline and not like a sergeant talking to you, informal, I can't imagine where. I guess there's a scenario, but for the most part, if you had 3 infractions that got to the chief's desk, the third one probably wouldn't be a citation as an overview. But in that situation or scenario, no amount of citations the only thing that will trigger not being able to take the next test is a suspension without pay. That's how you read it, Tom? I'm speaking?
Yes, I do, I agree.
Yeah.
So someone could get 3 or 4 citations and then they do something else, and then probably the next thing would be the suspension.
Under the
without pay.
current rules, it would probably be suspension without pay. Yeah.
A question, doesn't this run afoul of the union, like the contract? Here's my point is that you have like progressive discipline system now, right? I don't know, steps, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Now you're gonna add more steps. So if I were the union, I'd be concerned that all of a sudden, there's instead of 4 steps in the progressive discipline. In fact, they may even be happy because there's more steps.
Right.
I guess my question is, at some point, do anyone approach the union, or,
I think the township would be strongly advised when it comes to their action. Remember, there's 2 sets of rulings here. We do not make the rules.
right,
We present the rules that we approve to council, and they have to approve it or
Okay.
disapprove it. If both sides don't approve it, there's no rules.
right.
They'd be very well advised to at least consult their labor council on that
Right,
point.
right. That's-
If
I
not,
guess
to
that's
just do,
my-
yeah. I understand,
Sorry.
it's changing in the conditions of employment,
Right.
probably for the better.
Right, but it's still a change.
It's still a change, and I think that they would.
So here's the thing, when I was with the union, if there's change in employment and we don't challenge it, then the next time management says, well, this time we changed the conditions of employment and you didn't challenge it last time, so you can't, there's all kind of legalese involved. and-
Even the
Yeah, I'm
discipline-
sure that's, when it goes to council, they'll have their labor
But
council.
it's my opinion that there's already levels of discipline.
I'm fine with it, I think it's great.
Yeah,
think
I
it's
meant even under the current standards, there's already levels of discipline. It didn't get changed. The collective bargaining unit, in my opinion, doesn't have a say about them already.
I don't know, I disagree with that.
Well, it's not in the collective bargaining unit.
Well, there's a theory of progressive discipline that doesn't have to be in the
Okay.
collective bargaining agreement.
All right.
I don't want to get into,
No, I hear you. I know you
I'm
have
just
more
saying,
expertise than I
I'm
do.
just saying that there's a possibility
Always.
that this change, which I think it's a good change, because it actually stretches out the progressive discipline, instead of being,
A to Z.
discipline, you get 2 days suspension and then you're fired. Now you're adding more steps, which I think the union would be in favor of. But I'm just saying, they're gonna have to, I think, at some point, do something to either say they agree with it or challenge whatever.
I got you.
Now, will John come next month, because he was saying, and present this?
Yeah, well, he already, that's one of the things I have written down on the back of my sheet to
Yeah.
cover. The chief is coming here next month. To talk about this, he just thinks it's appropriate to come before this board and to discuss, some other states of the department where he thinks it's most appropriate that he appears in the meeting and speaks to this board directly. And I'm sure this will be one of the topics, but I think he wants to lay out maybe a vision for 2023, or just come before this board out of respect, to be honest with you. So yes, he does plan on being at the January meeting.
Any comments or questions on the lieutenant? Anything about the report on the state of the police department?
The 3 newer officers are progressing very well. They're all, I think I said last night, they're on their own, but closely watched, and it'll continue that way. Yeah, I mean, we're busy. We're busy. But I don't think we're the only ones. The shopping districts are really busy right now.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But no, I mean, things are going well. We're busy, and that's a police department. You're supposed to be busy.
Okay. Any comments for the good of the order? There is no public, so there's no public comment.
The only thing I'd add, just one last thing, is it possible, is this board interested in to actually writing something up formally to be ready for next month? Is that something that so we actually have something formal in writing for next month when the chief?
Yeah, I would appreciate it.
What's that?
Something to look
Yeah.
at, review.
Right.
Okay, you've got all,
Maybe before the
yeah.
meeting.
The board has to authorize me to do that, and I'll prepare a draft of the proposed changes. Okay.
So make a
I
motion.
make that.
Yeah. Second?
Second.
Okay. Okay, we can do that. All right, I guess it's time to make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Make a motion to adjourn.